2022. I will call the meeting to order. This meeting is a hybrid meeting, and I have to apologize to the rest of my board members. I had every intention of being there today, but my stomach is not cooperating, so you really don't want me in the room. But thank you very much for those that were able to come in present and those that are attending virtually. I appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. And with that, if we can do a roll call to see who's present today.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Can everyone hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine.
Great, thank you. Madam Chair?
Here.
Major Chris Rule?
Present.
Thank you. Miss Iris Valdez Corey Dunaway. Apologies.
Here.
Deputy Chief Lee Burkaw? Captain Chris Mills?
Here.
Thank you. Corporal Tiffany Lindsay Tester?
Here.
School Board Representative Karen Perez? Detective Sergeant Kevin Durkin? Just walked in the room. Mr. Charles Klug? Courtney Derry? Madam Public Defender Julianne Holt?
Here.
Thank you. Gina Justice is here on behalf of Chief Judge Ron Figueroa.
Yes,
Liz-
ma'am.
Thank you. Liz Gutierrez? Jennifer Glaister?
Here.
Santiago Carrata? Beverly Mogilnicki?
Here.
Kathleen Kemke?
Here.
Deborah Laskowski?
Present. Here.
Thank you. Connie Rose?
Here.
Thank you. Madam Chair, you do not have quorum.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we don't have quorum, but we do have some work to do today, so we can get quite a bit done. With that, I'd like to welcome our new community advocate, Deborah Laskowski. If you'd like to introduce yourself and give us a little bit about your background, that would be wonderful.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate the appointment, and I'm very happy to be here today. I am a licensed clinical social worker, retired as of about a year. And in the past, I've worked with not only sexual offenders, but also survivors of sexual abuse. And I see Ms. Kemke's there, and I was a employee at the Crisis Center twice. So, and the last time that I was there, I did some extensive work with those people that were involved, adolescents, adults, males and females in the human trafficking world. So, even though I'm not currently working actively, I still have an interest in this field, and I'm very happy to be here and hope that I can contribute something to the committee.
Well, I just want to welcome you and thank you very much for applying. And your background is perfect for exactly what we need. So thank you so much for being here. We also have a couple of things that have changed of recently. Apparently, both our law enforcement folks have gotten some great opportunities and have gotten promotions. And so we've seen a couple of changes here. For a brief period, we had Major Joseph Maurer who had joined us as the appointment from the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. He received a promotion, and we have a new member who you heard earlier, Major Chris Rule, who's with the Sheriff's Office. Major Rule, would you like to say a few words before we get started?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Chris Rule, Major Chris Rule. I'm currently employed with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. Just recently promoted and transferred to the Special Investigations Division. I do have a little background with the Special Investigations Division. I've been there throughout my career for over 15 years, working with undercover units and undercover operations. So on behalf of Sheriff Chaos Chronister and Chief Deputy Donna Lazinski, thank you guys for the opportunity to be able to here and sit on this board and help in any way we can. So thank you, ma'am.
Excellent, thank you. Our law enforcement partners are so very important because as we recognize that oftentimes victims and survivors of human trafficking are not recognized as as that. And so we want to make sure that our law enforcement are great partners in that, and we have an opportunity to address where there is a crime and where there isn't. So I appreciate you being here and participating in our meetings. Also departing was Sergeant Gerald Baker from the Plant City Police Department. He was not able to continue serving, and his replacement is Corporal Tiffany Tester, also of the Plant City Police Department. Did I hear Corporal Tester was here? I don't recall.
I'm
There you
here.
are.
Hi.
There you are. Hi.
Hi.
Well, welcome, welcome. Glad to have you as part of our board and our mission. If you'd like to introduce yourself for a second, we'd appreciate that.
Sure. Corporal Tiffany Lindsay Tester from the Plant City Police Department. I've been with our agency approximately 16 and a half years. 12 of those years I've been in our criminal investigations division, and of that, about 8 years I've specialized in our special victims unit. So hopefully I'll be able to gain a lot of knowledge from this group, and every once in a while, hopefully to impart a negative knowledge of my own. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining and thank you for serving on our board. The next section is actually our time for public comment. We do set aside time for public comment, and we're able to allow those that sign up to speak for about 3 minutes at our regular meeting, either by signing up to speak or by attending the meeting. Do we have anyone that's signed up to speak today?
Madam Chair, we do not have anyone signed up to speak for public comment.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So that I won't read the 14 paragraph sentences I don't necessarily need to read since we don't have anybody signed up. So that'll help us move this meeting along. The next item is the review of the March 31st minutes. We're unable to actually approve those minutes, but if you've had an opportunity to review them, are there any changes that would be recommended or observed in the review? Not hearing any, I will defer the actual approval of those minutes to the next meeting, but thank you very much for that review. And that brings us to the chair's report. There are a couple of things that I wanted to bring to the committee's attention, and part of it is some of the things that we've heard in the past reports. But I also wanted to share with you, there is as a result of serving on the Public Safety Coordinating Council, I have the pleasure of actually getting a better understanding of recidivism and what that really means, and frequently what happens with individuals that have been arrested or incarcerated when they are migrating back to freedom or coming back to society. There are a significant number of challenges that are oftentimes the case with human trafficking victims. For example, we find that in the report that we reviewed for those with returning from incarceration, but also with possibly mental health challenges, that the biggest areas of barriers to success, keeping folks from having to go back to jail for one reason or another, are big barriers in our community. One is housing. The other is transportation. The other is job skills to be able to support oneself, and the supportive needs associated with mental health that are a very important part of helping someone adjust. With that, what we've found is that our partnership with the sheriff's office, with the work that the sheriff is going to be doing with his step down unit, hopefully over the next year, will be beneficial and give us an opportunity of really helping those that have been arrested for a variety of charges, but also prostitution, to give them the skills and the tools that they need to be able to move on to success, um, in getting back their lives back. So that's where the counseling and the services that we have available on site at the jails at the very first arrest is important, but also upon exit. And so I would like to see in working with the various different working groups, how we can partner with law enforcement and with the sheriff's office to ensure that those individuals that have been arrested and have a criminal record, have the best opportunity of getting back on with their lives until we're able to address some sentencing guidelines or other opportunities to reduce the challenge associated with a history of arrests. With that, also, the next item was housing discussion. As many of you know, we are in a housing crisis. We have probably, I think, at last I heard, about 15 to 18,000 people that either have housing vouchers they can't use or are looking to use, or those that are trying to find housing. So this service that will be available to help individuals coming from incarceration to back to society is going to be really stressed in trying to find housing. So I, because I do chair affordable housing, I'm working very closely with the Board of County Commission on addressing ways that we can increase the densities to allow for additional units that are set aside for affordable housing, but also looking for surplus lands as much as possible to be able to provide additional opportunities to build additional affordable housing along our transit corridors, since that correlates with one of the areas where recidivism tends to raise its ugly head. Because not having transportation and not having housing is a sure way to fail. So those are some, I wanted to bring you up to speed that we are working on those areas. We do not have inventory right now for too many people in our area. So it will continue to be a challenge. So where we have partners that are actually focusing on specialized housing for individuals that are survivors of human trafficking, those efforts will be very much appreciated as that becomes more of a reality. Additionally, we have we're at the point where budgets are being discussed. And it's critically important that we stay on track with the things that we've invested in the past in order to be able to address the fact that there may be other things we'd like to do, but what are we doing otherwise? One is we are committed to making sure that we have funding available for the crisis center. And one of the things I'm going to ask Ms. Kempke to provide is an update on how that program's going, and if you anticipate any additional budget requests beyond what was set aside for last year, which was about $83,000.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, all the things you talked about, housing, transportation, not only affects our clients, but affects our workers too, right? So the crisis center has, nonprofits in general don't pay exorbitant salaries. Everybody knows that when we go into this, but we have to have livable wages for our employees. So the crisis center would like to ask for a 10% increase so that we can increase staff salaries who are working in the human trafficking care coordination program, help with their benefits, and also do some additional training because we've had some staff turnover and we'd like to have additional training. And we find that it is most effective when we have somebody come in. So we'd like to have that as well. And so we're asking for a 10% increase. I know I reported last month about how the program has grown. It's not huge growth, but it is certainly growing in the people that are calling us and being referred to other community partners. And also we're working with USF and the Bright program that will expand things quite a bit. But again, that process is a slow go. We should be piloting it by the end of the year. So that's what would be really helpful for us.
And that's one of the reasons why I asked. You had previously given us a presentation on the referral resource process. How do you, when you have someone call in and you have to provide or would need to provide a referral for them for a variety of services, it sounded as though the crisis center was trying to do a lot of that yourselves. Is that partnership with the Bright Project, with USF's TIP Lab, actually making progress?
Yes, yeah, it is.
Because if you have to do that yourself, that's going to be expensive. But if we're able to actually partner with them for that capacity monitoring and referral network building, that would give us a good idea of, one, what resources are out there, what their capacity looks like, and to give you and those others, for example, if the sheriff is able to build this step down unit, resources to be able to refer individuals to, and officers as well, when they find a human trafficking victim, to make sure they know who to call, or where those individuals can go, and not spend a half a day trying to figure out what to do with this
Well,
victim.
that's the plan. It certainly is going to take a bit to get there. But Jillian sits on the committee with me that's getting this moving. It looks like we'll be ready to pilot it with maybe 4 or 5 community partners by the end of this year. We should have something to be able to report on that. The idea is that law enforcement, community members, victims can call and get immediately connect with a provider. And that's the hope, but we have a ways to go on that. We've done a lot of work, but it's not only is it figuring out the everyone who's involved, it's also the technical part of it and getting our computer systems to talk to one another, all those things, which that's not my purview, but that I feel like we are moving toward that. Would you say, Jillian, we have made some pretty good leaps this year? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely a lot of progress.
Mhm.
That is great to hear. That is great to hear, because that's actually crucial. We will advise the board on things that we need to invest in, and but we also can find resources that the county has with partnerships across the board, like with the United Way and others, to be able to bring to the table if we have a clear understanding of what resources we need. So having a good feel for what is needed, where we need to invest in the community to provide an opportunity for these folks to move in a positive direction with their lives is critically important. And that's why the budget, becomes, why I want to make sure that we've set aside the resources that you need. If you don't mind, and send me an email to that effect, and I'll make sure that we include it in our budget requests for this next year.
Thank you.
You're welcome, because you've been a great partner, and are doing a lot of the heavy lifting for this effort. So I truly appreciate your time there. We've also heard in the past, we heard from our court liaison, who actually is working well with the crisis center, I assume, and that I'm hoping that will continue to go well, in order to make sure that we have an opportunity when folks are going through the legal system, that they get the help that they need, in the event that they're not caught before they get there.
Yeah.
Captured before and identified before we get there. We'll hear more about that in a little bit. The other items are some things that I look forward to hearing from the committees, but earlier this month I got notified that our training program that we had developed a couple of years ago, which was actually early on, very early on, with IHDI, their online training program that we offer to employers. That contract expired. And I have to double check with Beth to find out when, but it did expire. So the services, the Committee on Services and Resources, or outreach, is going to be really important that we monitor those contracts, because that contract has expired. And I wanted the committee to consider actually the process of possibly going out to RFP to see if we are able to find a comparable type of training program that can meet our needs, or whether our current service provider can provide the service. The reason I'm mentioning that is, one, we didn't know that our contract had expired. We have had a very nice success or positive response from various different employers that have taken it, and all the county employees are taking it. So we want to make sure that that program does continue. However, if there's a better, you know, if there's a better mousetrap out there, we probably ought to look for it. The reason I say that is that when we created this training program, there were only like 2 or 3 training programs out there. The transit agencies had one, and the hotel and restaurant businesses had some. There were a few for school systems that were out there, but this was an opportunity to just talk to the broader audience, and that was the original goal. Um, and so since then, they've popped up everywhere. Everybody seems to have a training program. So I think that I wanted to have the uh, education and outreach uh, committee or the services and resource. So you guys got to tell me which one was the best one to do that. To take a look at the best options and come back to us rather quickly because we'll need to establish the budget for that. Previously, we had I'm trying to remember exactly, but we had spent, um, well, I have to pull the back reports, but we had spent a pretty good money developing that training, and then it was priced in such a way that based on the number of units, there were number of people that were trained. So that was the original pricing model. So I'm hoping that we can pull the original contracts and actually ask the working committee to review those and then do some research on who's out there, and so that we can ask procurement to assist us in putting out an RFP for that service. The other contract that's expired most recently is our contract with FKQ that has done our marketing. And they developed all of the marketing materials that we have right now to address in concert with the Super Bowl. So it worked very nicely. We were able to dovetail the work that we were getting with the Super Bowl on outreach and then create our own sort of branding through the Don't Buy It Tampa Bay branding. And FKQ had done a beautiful job of that. When I was thinking about the marketing and outreach, I thought that maybe we might want to also make sure that we're marketing our Hillsborough Heroes training program. And that's when I found that that had expired. So I was like, okay, we've got 2 contracts that need attention that our working committees can assist us in addressing. So given that we had between those 2 contracts approximately 267,000, allocated towards those dollars, those efforts, split between the 2. I think it would be wise to really take a look at those 2 services, those 2 efforts, and make sure that we have a good strategic plan for how they can be done and what we expect them to accomplish so that we can maintain our budget. Currently, we have set aside approximately $350,000 as a budget for the Commission on Human Trafficking. And I would like to make sure we keep it. It's a use it or lose it kind of thing. So it's going to be very important that we work with, have the working groups take a look at our best recommendations on how to solve that problem, and then give procurement some time to do an RFP for the next budget year to make sure that we have a good strategy in place and we have the resources set aside for those things. And that's why I wanted to talk about the budget. Because it's important that we identify those things that we need the county to assist us in paying for, and those that would not be provided by other services. We also had set aside, and we have set aside, but it doesn't come out of our Commission on Human Trafficking budget, the court liaison position, and that doesn't come out of that 350,000. And that's 100,000 that we set aside there. So we'll need to check with the justice system and see, given that wages are increasing, keeping people in staff is expensive. And as we've discovered in this area, that if you don't pay people well enough, they leave. and we lose continuity, and turnover is expensive. So we want to make sure that we're doing what we can to be prepared for the 2023 budget adoption hearing, which begins on August 18th. So the committees do need to meet in July and come back with us with some numbers as quickly as possible. With that, let's move on to the subcommittee recaps and assignments. And Connie Rose, you're on deck, and you also had your hand up, so I would imagine it has to do with that.
It does. Actually, it had to do with the training. But let me do the recap first. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. So this is for the Education and Outreach Subcommittee. The last time that we met was on April 28th of 2022. Myself, Ellie Kane, Tiffany McKinney, and Nilda Otero. And we had several members that were absent. Do I need to read those members that were absent? Okay, thank you. So what we did is we kind of did a little round robin, just kind of reintroduced ourselves, really talked about the organizations that we each, or agencies that we represented, and basically what we brought to the table in the realm of education and outreach. We also discussed several different ways that we could expand our awareness efforts. How could we train? How could we even expand, which is ironic, the conversation that you just had with us, Commissioner, about Hillsborough Heroes. That how could we take what we have and then expand it out even just a little bit broader for some of the other folks that we serve, service providers, such as, say, if we broke it down to healthcare, law enforcement, school, etc. We also talked about how do we review Don't Buy at Tampa Bay, and again, how could we keep that more of a long-going message throughout the year, and then really intensify it whenever we know that there is a season such as Beach Week, kids going back to school, spring break, summer break, and sporting events, etc. And other than that, we did have a very brief discussion about victims court. However, we have an incredible presentation today from Judge Bowman, so I do not really want to address that. But may I take a moment to address about your request in the process of RFPs for training? Okay, so what I'd like to request is our committee does not meet again until July the 28th. Is it possible for us to hold an emergency meeting to have this conversation of what are the needs, assessment, to get the scope of work from the commission so that we can have the information ready for you? I think by August 18th is your budget meeting.
Right. Well, that's when we come back to address the budget, which is another reason why it's so important that we, let's see. It's 1 o'clock. I don't have the actual date on the calendar. Is Beth there?
Hi, Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
The meeting is scheduled for, I believe it's August 18th. You're right, it's not.
Okay,
August
so that
18th,
is our
yes.
next meeting. And then you're getting together actually just July 28th is the next committee meeting. So you're looking to try to meet prior to that?
If we can, what we have done is we've changed and all committees meet on the same day, since several folks sit on more than one committee to make it much easier. Hello, Jillian. So make it much easier for some of us. But you're going to need information from the committee, I'm assuming, before August 18th. And I do not believe that's enough turnaround time from July 28th to August 18th.
Well, actually, that meeting is our meeting. It's not the budget meeting, but it is our meeting. So
Okay.
that is our meeting. So if you're able to come back to us on 18th to give us some alternatives to consider, do some research on what's out there, like what companies might be able to provide us with an alternative to the company we've currently contracted with, that to address what you've described as a broader scope. That would be sufficient, I believe, at that point. And then we can ask procurement to assist us in getting us some ideas about how to get what that process would look like. Now, procurement takes time, takes a long time. But if in the process of doing some ideas of what's out there, you can get some round numbers of what that would look like, that would be very helpful. So that
Okay.
we make sure, because right now we're going to stay within the budget unless we hear otherwise.
All right, so would it be possible for the folks that are on the Education and Outreach Subcommittee to receive what the current scope of work is? What does the contract look like? What were all the details of the contract? Because that is the only way we're going to be able to go back out and look at what's comparable or even expanded. Can
Mhm.
it add additional service? So
I
would we,
believe Beth was able to pull that together. We had a presentation not too long ago on that, and that sort of described what it was that they were doing and what they provided, and gave us a better understanding of the scope. If Beth, was that meeting recorded by some chance?
I do not believe it was, but I'm happy to get the information out.
Okay,
Thank
all
you.
right, yeah, if we could provide that to the committee, I'm sure that would help them with their task and give you the scope of what you're looking for to compare.
Yes,
And then we also have that scope and contract available for the Don't Buy a Tampa Bay, Don't Buy a Tampa Bay campaign that previously we contracted with FKQ on that. So that information can also be provided to you for that meeting on the 28th of July, if that's
and it's my understanding that if we recommended that our current provider, IHTI, would continue providing the services, they would still have to go through the RFP process.
they would need to apply with the other companies as well, yes.
Perfect.
And
All right, thank you.
honestly, that would probably be preferred for two
Mhm.
reasons. There are what our current provider provides us in the way of data dump, if you want to call it that, is great, but we don't have anyone on staff to actually harvest through that data. The Commission on Human Trafficking only has Beth, and she has a lot of different a lot of different jobs. So we don't currently have the support that we once had. To be able to have someone parse through that data and identify where are our hot spots, where are our calls coming in, where are people actually training, and is that increasing the number of calls from that area, to be able to measure the benefit of the training and to see if that outreach is actually providing results and people being able to either report or we find that law enforcement has found additional arrests in those areas. We don't really have the staff on board to do that. Some of the providers out there have some of that as part of their scope of services. So in going out to the market, we could take a look at what other bells and whistles have popped up as the industry has matured since we developed ours, to see if there's a better mousetrap, as I put it. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So that's where the education outreach, as far as the marketing scope and the training scope, is really just to get back to us with some recommendations on how to proceed, and then we can put it out to RFP to determine how to best accomplish that. But as I mentioned, I wanted to see if it's possible to include in our marketing scope a way of also highlighting and helping corporations be aware that the training is there so they can educate their employees, to include that as part, which we did not ask FKQ to do before. So. Okay, next item on the agenda is the Legislative and Judicial Affairs recap. Mr. Klug.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, Commissioners. The Legislative and Judicial Subcommittee met on April 28th with 11 of our 14 members present and heard presentations by Ms. Lauren Storch and Ms. Angie Smith. So Ms. Storch presented an update on state legislation and a high-level update on House Bill 615 dealing with the training of firefighters. She also provided a federal update regarding the bill passed in the Senate that will expand access to communication services for survivors and additional funding items. Ms. Smith spoke on working with a vendor on mapping court system processing and victim support. Judge Bowman added that victims have been identified in truancy court and that other potential victims could be identified and other areas such as family law and domestic violence courts. Judge Bowman discussed the importance of judges being fully informed of signs that would alert them to a victim. That was followed by a lively discussion of the victims treatment court model and the use of the model that is in place now in courts in Hillsborough County and the rest of Florida, as well as the Veterans Treatment Court. And finally, Ms. Juliana Holt noted the importance of looking at the data and looping in the prosecutor's office in a more timely manner. And that's it for our update.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. With that, because we had such a lively, excuse me, a lively discussion, wanted to bring to the attention of our overall committee a presentation by Judge Bowman on the options court and how we should consider, now that we have our court liaison, who is still, getting her feet wet. She's only been with us for, I guess, a little bit less than a year, I think, and has been hit the floor running, trying to figure out all the tools and techniques that she needs to identify cases that should be considered. We wanted to make sure that we also took a look at what it has been successful and whether or not it would be recommended to move forward with a human trafficking court in general. And so with that, I will recognize Judge Bowman.
Thank you, Commissioner Overman. This is Judge Robert Bowman. I handle here in the 13th Judicial Circuit, I handle the crossover division, which is essentially everything that juveniles come across: truancy, dependency, delinquency, sexting, sex crimes, mental health, etc. So in doing so, just to give you a little bit of background, when I first got to the crossover division about 7 years ago now, I was seeing 2 to 4 kids a week that were victims of human trafficking. Thought it was a need that needed to be addressed. I went to Miami's Grace Court, and I've spoken to the judge that originated it, as well as Judge Zayas, and even followed up and spoke to Judge Zayas yesterday. So we kind of modeled our option court a little bit after Grace courts. There's a little bit of difference in that they are, when they have their hearings, they are almost a full dependency court as well. Whereas under our crossover division, we're not necessarily a full dependency court, but we are focusing on the child that's within a dependency case. If we could go to the third page, if we skip the title. And let me just briefly on the title, I'll just tell you that it does say offering potentially trafficked individual options now. And why do we have that? Why do we call it option court? Because we know that for the most part, most victims, one, they won't identify as a victim, especially when you're dealing with youth, with juveniles. And two, the idea is to plant the seed, to let them know that there are some options, opportunities for services to assist them. That's why key and critical to us is the use of survivor mentors. So we put that, we get that connection right away to help break that trigger bond between the trafficker and the victim. If we could go to the next page, please. Okay, the facts. This is how we operate. We're based upon jurisdiction from delinquency and dependency. Our team is essentially myself, Alyssa Hall, our court case manager, the juvenile probation officers. We have Hillsborough County Public Schools liaison, the assistant public defenders, assistant state attorneys, survivor mentors or leaders from NGOs, dependency case managers, attorneys ad litem, missing child specialist, who is critical to what we do in terms of our victims being on the run and locating them. If they're being posted on social media or some other information from family, our missing child specialist is brilliant in that regard. That is a DCF employee currently, but we would love to have our own in the future. The Hillsborough County Sheriff Human Trafficking Team, Court Human Trafficking Liaison, the Guardians ad litem, Guardian ad litem Counsel, Children's Legal Services, Service Providers, Regional Counsel, and Court-appointed attorneys. When we started this court, the idea was collaboration, and this one of the successes of our court has been collaboration between all of those individuals that are mentioned there, all of those entities excuse me, mentioned there. And with that respect, what we do is we look and try to identify. Some were glaring from the very start when I got in the division, but this is how we identify for purposes of option court victims. We look at points of intercept for juvenile CSEC youth. We look at detention dockets, detention hearings, shelter dockets, shelter petitions, SINS-FINS court and petitions, truancy court, dependency court, the arraignments and judicial reviews, notification from other agencies, whether Sheriff's Office, DJJ, or the NGOs. Criminal report affidavits are really critical in that regard because it'll mention the 15-year-old girl that's found in the hotel room with the unknown 52-year-old male, and the girl is naked and on drugs, and there's money on the table. In-court appearances. Now, why is that important? Because sometimes that is one of the most glaring issues where we have a child that we know is in foster care, shows up in whether it's detention or in court with brand new clothes, brand new set of nails, hair, eyelashes, multiple phones in their pockets. Another issue is when that individual may come to court and there's somebody speaking on their behalf. The child won't look at the trafficker. The child will have their head down. The trafficker will do all the talking. And that happens. We've had children, we've had traffickers in the courthouse. We've had traffickers right outside the courthouse. And fortunately, our sheriff's office are trained and usually identify those traffickers to the point where they will leave before ever having to identify themselves. But those are the ways we identify victims, in addition to the HTST that's used by various agencies, primarily for us, the DCF. If you look at the pie chart there, it says identified youth 76, the watch list 43, not substantiated 34. Not substantiated doesn't mean that they're not a victim. So in many instances, using the factors that I've already discussed, in many instances, we don't necessarily wait for a multidisciplinary team to make a decision, management team at DCF, because that could take 30 to 60 days. In fact, we had one today. Our option court was held this morning. We had 10 different children. We were told that after 60 days, that one of our children, the MDT, still hadn't made a decision whether or not this child should be verified or substantiated, despite the fact that there were 4 open CSEC investigations, including the child indicating that she had had sex with older men for money. So we don't wait. We want to move as fast as possible to get the victim as much as assistance as possible. The HTST, sometimes we found it not to be reliable because we've had facts or red flags, 5 different factors. And if the person giving that test at the bottom, it literally asks the question, are you a victim of human trafficking? Well, does a 13-year-old girl understand what human trafficking is? Does the 13-year-old girl understand that she's a victim? And based upon grooming, is she going to say that she's a victim? It's not going to happen. So when that answer is no, and then the report is, well, the child said she was not a victim, so not substantiated. That's not going to help us. So that's why we have to look beyond what the test is, what the HTST states. So in most instances, we're not going to wait for that response. We're going to look at all the red flags that are being presented to the court through the various hearings and documentation available to us. Next page, please. So we've had almost 300 hearings. We've encountered about 213 youth that are victims with respect to human trafficking. With respect to those victims, we have had success. So the role of our court, how do you measure success? Well, the youth not running. We have children that have been on the run for as long as 2 years. I mean, that's just scary. We literally had a hearing where it was reported by the guardian ad litem, they no longer knew whether that child was alive or not. And that's just downright sad. Fortunately, that child popped up a year later, thank goodness, and is doing fine. So youth not running, youth re-engaging in school, youth participating in services, youth agreeing to a safe house. Those may seem minimal. Nowhere does it say youth states that they're a victim ready to be rescued. And keep in mind the words rescue versus recover, because we hear these somewhat interchangeably. The only person that can rescue a victim is the victim themselves. We can recover a child that's on the run. We can recover a child that is recruiting or being groomed. We can recover all day long. But the only person that decides whether they're going to be rescued is the child themselves. And if that child decides, and we know based upon hearing the stories of survivors, hearing the stories of different victims, that it takes a long time for them to acknowledge they're a victim and to seek the help and assistance. It doesn't happen overnight. So those measurements of success can be very small. Just a child agreeing to work on a GED, just a child agreeing to re-enroll in school, just a child agreeing to stay put for a week while we attempt to get services in place, that can be a success. And we have our success stories there. Probably the most glaring of the four, because you can read those and it's in the materials we provided, but probably one of the most important was the second one, the transgender youth that came through detention on an out-of-state warrant. So our jurisdiction was fleeting. The child came through on an out-of-state warrant. The question was the other state willing to take the child back? The child was turning 18 about 2 weeks later, and the other state was up in the air. We immediately contacted their dependency. We contacted the adopted mother. We contacted the grandmother. They didn't even know when the last time the child was in state and had attended school. So we knew that there was no way this child could survive going back to the other state. We were fortunate enough to get Created Tampa involved in helping our assistants. And thanks, Jillian, for helping out. That child turned 18. We were able to, through our providers, the child has relocated to Miami, and as far as we know, is doing very well, which we only had one day that we encountered that child, and we were able to help that child out. That's how, in one respect, it's that difficult to identify a victim, why it takes a little bit of research, but we had a very fortunate result for that particular child. The other ones as well, we have children with histories of running. We've been able to place children at different locations. Sometimes the safe house works, sometimes it doesn't. If the child's a recruiter, we've had good and bad in that respect. And while I'm on the issue of safe houses, understand that our male safe house closed. It's no longer in service. Understand that there's another female safe house in the state of Florida. It closed. I think we're down to 6 or 8 safe houses within the state. There are no safe houses in Hillsborough County. So when it comes to a safe house, and when it comes to placement of that child, if that child refuses to go, that puts us in a very awkward position, especially if it's a foster child, on where we're going to place that child. So I think in some respects, we're going to need to figure out what we can do with some of these children. Some refuse to go out of county, some refuse to leave a group home, etc. Next slide, please. So this is our data in terms of how many cases do we hear. You can look at the numbers there. You can see that September, October of 2020 during COVID, that the numbers had dropped. Let me tell you that during COVID, our children that were involved in numerous delinquency matters linked up with our HT victims, and all of a sudden you had them working in different areas, working with one another, recruiting one another. for different matters. We literally had one child showing up with suitcases at a foster home, recruiting girls. 2 different occasions, there were car chases after car thefts involved. Some very, very serious matters. So COVID did us no favors. Absolutely no favors. And I'll get back to COVID, the impact of COVID again in a minute. But these are the numbers we have. And we're looking at over about 298 hearings in 30 months, involving over on or about 213 children. There are several of those that are repetitive. Yes. Why? Because we want to follow the child. We want to see if we can have success. We know that that child maybe in January of 2020 went on the run for 5 months, and we saw them again in June or July of 2020. So we don't simply, it's not a one-stop shop. The idea is that it's an option. We're providing you an opportunity that you can obtain services from our providers, that you can meet with somebody on a level ground, a survivor mentor that's been through what you've been through. So we understand that if you want to look at the numbers, say, well, that doesn't seem like a lot per hearing, but I think in the long run, when you're talking to approximately 200 children or more over less than a 3-year time span, that's a lot of kids. That's a lot of kids that we have to deal with. Keep in mind, these are the ones that are coming through the court system, through dependency or delinquency. This has nothing to do with family law or domestic violence at this time. But also keep in mind that statistically, what are coming through the courts in the state of Florida are 20% of the victims. That means we have 80% of victims out there that we never see, that are community kid victims. And we need to be able to address that as well. But that's also 80% of a caseload of our survivor mentors that are working with community kids as well as those coming through option court. So they're overworked and they're overloaded and they're underpaid. We're very fortunate to have them assist us. I mean, it's one of the many steps forward we've been able to achieve as we've gone through this last 2.5-year period. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right. This one should be familiar. No, go back one. There you go. This should be familiar because we've presented this before. We're shifting gears, and now we're looking at the adults. Defendants, possible HT victims, are accruing charges related to other crimes. So this is data we obtained from the clerk's office for the period of January 2018 to February 15 of 2021. And we had over 534 unique identifiers. And these are the breakdowns of some of what those individuals had. And these are based upon prostitution, the basis being a prostitution charge. Now let's keep in mind something, that our sheriff's office is very well informed, as are all of our law enforcement agencies, about victims. We have Selah Freedom that engaged. So this number doesn't include all of those that are encountered during a sting or during an arrest at a motel or a strip club or something like that. Some of those victims are released to Selah Freedom or other organizations or whoever may be assisting law enforcement. These are the ones that are charged. And what we look at is not only do they have a prostitution case, but there's also the related cases. Because when you're a victim, you're called upon to do other things. Take drugs, sell drugs, break into cars, break into homes. Support your habit by doing drugs. These are all related. Continue to prostitute. We have second charges, third charges, or third plus charges. So that's the time frame then. Let's go to the next slide, please. Because there's been the request for data, let's look at the bar graph there. 2019, 339 adult prostitution, human trafficking related charges. 339 that came through our court system. You see the huge dip in 2020? Why? It's during COVID. So what stopped or what was lessened? The streetwalkers, the strip clubs, the hotel trafficking. A lot of that was reduced, right? Because of different things being shut down. So it went to social media. And I think the national hotline for the National Human Trafficking Hotline data even suggests that with respect to social media trafficking, it increased by, or it was 70% rather than what you had otherwise. But then look what happens in 2021, 457 cases. In 2022, we're not even half, and we're just halfway through the year, 122 cases. So that number totals 1,105. And keeping in mind again that as our task force, as the commission's been more engaged, as law enforcement's been more engaged, as we identify, as we educate, that we're having fewer and fewer victims that are arrested. We're still talking about 1,105 over just a few years span, not even 4 full years. So that calls in what we think is necessary, because my concern is this: the children that are in front of me become adults. And who's going to protect them if we don't? Because knowing that our victims continue to go back to their traffickers until they identify as victims and want to be rescued, we need to continue to provide them that opportunity for services. We need to continue to protect them from being charged with prostitution when they're adult. You know, one of the sayings is, and I think several people have heard it, nobody gets up in the morning, looks in the mirror and says, you know what, I think I'll be a prostitute today. That's one of the things we always hear. You know, when we know about grooming, when we know the averages, the average child being groomed is 12 to 14 years old, that's a concern. We're talking about a 13-year-old today. That's with a 25-year-old trafficker. A trafficker known as one that ties, shackles, and beats his victims, the ones he's groomed, if they don't meet quotas, if they don't do as told. So why should that beating continue until the time that they're adults? Why should that trauma continue until through their adulthood? If the idea is to assist these victims, we need to step up and do that. And you look at the different related prostitution charge counts: soliciting another to commit, entering or remaining in a place for prostitution, aiding or abetting. That sounds like a trafficker. Unlawful acts as a precursor. Offering to procure another for prostitution, that's trafficking. Everything there pretty much falls within the definition. You know, the definition we've provided in our administrative order, all of these things are important. Forcing another to become a prostitute, that's trafficking. So to suggest that we don't have a trafficking issue, why don't we look at what's being talked about Tampa nationally? What's talked about Florida nationally? Florida is the 3rd largest state in the country with respect to reported cases of human trafficking. And what's shocking is Tampa is 12th. You can Google Tampa in terms of reported human trafficking. There's an article out there that says Tampa is number 1 in the country of American cities engaged that has human trafficking. That's alarming. That's scary. And I know that we're doing everything we can, but because of us being such a great city, such a beautiful city, that we're a target, and we have been. So we're a top 12 American city per capita making calls to the national hotline, human trafficking hotline. So that's alarming. And keep in mind that the graph is about prostitution, right? So what about labor trafficking? There's very little in there about labor trafficking, which is the hardest to identify. The hardest to identify. We've identified labor trafficked kids in truancy court. We've identified them through shelters and various other activities. It's hard to identify. It's hard for law enforcement to identify. It's not simply a federal issue. So it's real important that we continue to look out. We continue to educate. I'm not sure, Commissioner, that you want to know what we need for option court. I mean, first of all, we're still waiting for an administrative order. Why is that important to us? Because we want to be able to get funding. You know, and some of our needs are, we would love to have a full-time missing children specialist. We would love to have at least 2, if not 4, survivor leaders in our courtroom to meet with these children to lessen the load of our current survivor leaders. We would love to have more safe houses, maybe some in Hillsborough County where we could help our dependent children, help our victims in our county instead of them refusing to go elsewhere. You know, and I may have mentioned before, but the success of Grace Court in Miami is founded upon their provider, their agency, their contractor to DCF, who has gone out and found homes where the caregivers are HT trauma trained, and maybe the sole child in the home is a victim. They now have, I believe, 6 or 8 of those. We were promised that 4 years ago, and we don't have one. That's what we need. Because if you have a recruiter and send a recruiter to a safe house, and we've already seen it, that recruiter is going to take another child out of that safe house, and they're going to run, and they're going to go right back. And you know what? Now we have another victim. And in that case was here in Tampa. From the Panhandle came here in Tampa. So that's our wish list. You know, the other part of it is, I think there is a need for an adult trafficking court. I'm willing to do whatever's necessary to help that. I would love to help that, because the kids that I see at 12, 13, 17 turn 18, become adults. I don't want to hear about something awful happening to them. I don't want to, run into them in the courthouse that they're on the 2nd floor for misdemeanor prostitution cases. I want to know that we've done everything we can to, 1, never put them in that situation of being a victim through education, and 2, that if they are a victim, we've done everything possible to help them understand and help them rescue themselves. So thank you, everybody, for your time. Obviously, I'm very passionate about this. It's extremely important, but it's also somewhat embarrassing to hear the numbers and how our state and city are looked upon. But I know that everybody here does everything they can to avoid that labeling or stigma, and we just need to continue to do so. We can't do anything about the traffickers coming here except to try to find them and to educate our community about them. And we know that through various things, this is a target area. So thank you again, everyone. I appreciate your time. Madam Commissioner, I thank you so much for your time on this issue.
Thank you. Thank you for the report, and thank you for helping us understand. I too have some concerns about kids that are aging out of the DCF system, aging out of the foster care system. And interestingly enough, as soon as you're cut free from DCF, you're literally cut off. All your support systems disappear. All of your network disappears. All of your guardian ad litem disappears. All those folks that were around to assist you when you turn 18, you're done. And so that unfortunately leads to the potential of having those that have been exposed to human trafficking very much at risk, and honestly being arrested for prostitution and then having to live with that legacy, which is quite challenging. I am in the process of investigating our hiring practices to see if someone has what level of charges would keep someone from working in government? What level of charges would it keep someone from working in, Judge Bowman's court? You know, and we had that question when we were concerned about when we needed to fill our court liaison position is how do we get someone here who understands this, who has a passion for this, that will be of assistance in addressing this issue when we have sentencing guidelines that do not expire or we do not have a robust expungement process within our court system for adults in order to allow them to move on with their lives. So that's why I had on under Mr. Klug's item the review of human trafficking sentencing guidelines. I'd like to take a look at that, and it's not really a human trafficking sentencing guidelines, but those related charges that where a human trafficking is identified. And right now, the only place we're seeing that, from what I gathered, on a documented base, because we don't have an adult court, would be in the options court. So, Judge Bowman, can I ask you, for those children that have gone through the options court, if they have been trafficked and do they have prostitution charges against them as a minor, and do they carry that into adulthood?
No, they do not. They cannot under the Safe Harbor Act, under Florida statute. And
Okay.
the Safe Harbor Act has been in effect for, I believe, 7 years now, at least. So I think anybody that would have come through as a victim in option court, they would not have been ever received those charges. But we do have, Brent Woody and Janae Urado that are helping all of those that have been charged, and they do work with juveniles as well. So, but for us, no. And the flip side of the Safe Harbor Act was that if they weren't being charged with prostitution and they were being released, where were they going? Because they weren't coming before us, which could mean that we missed that opportunity to assist a victim.
Right. Okay. Well, I would like to, and it's probably not the right title as far as human trafficking sentences guidelines, but because it sounds like it's more of the guidelines associated with prostitution. But I would like for our committee to revisit that question is, when there are, for example, in your presentation, the slide that talked about the charges from 2018 to 21, there were a slew of charges there that all have long-lasting consequences that will follow someone. For example, the 534 unique defendant identifiers. Could you explain what that meant, what that means?
Yeah, those are all of the cases that were prostitution charges to begin with. They were all based upon prostitution.
Okay.
And this was information that came from the clerk's office. We just simply asked for a breakdown.
Okay.
Give us a breakdown of those prostitution cases. And then from there, because the concern is the ancillary charges, so that's why we broke it out after that.
Right. So, for example, in this case, of the 534, 322 had drugs and substance abuse as well?
Yes, had a related charge with cocaine being the prominent drug, yes.
Okay. And then but they may also have, for example, the 158 regarding battery and domestic violence and assault.
And that's why I think it's critical to talk about the domestic violence issue, because, it may be presented as boyfriend, girlfriend, that they're living together, but it might be a lot more than that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we do know that frequently with domestic violence, that same hesitancy about leaving your abuser is very much the case with human trafficking as well, especially when our safety nets for making a different choice are not as solid as they need to be. So if what I'd like to find out from you is if, what would be the process of establishing an adult court? And how would we go about facilitating that process? Or what would you recommend our path be in the event that that is a recommendation this board would like to consider?
Well, I think we have to look at, first of all our misdemeanor and felony, as well as our DV. I think we need to educate all our judges. So they're not just human trafficking informed in terms of identifiers, but also trauma trained, because that's a big issue. Is it's one thing to identify a victim, but it's another one not to call a victim a prostitute in court, right? So that I think would be important. So we start with education of court staff and judges. I think we would need an administrative order, which would require all of our public leaders, again, whether it's law enforcement, the public defender's office, state attorney's office, everybody would need to get on board. The clerk would be critical in that regard, because the clerk would have to help identify and how to, if we're going to do an adult court, on what basis do we identify or label that? In Grace Court in Miami, they never use the words HT, prostitution, etc. with respect to the youth. They actually assign a number. I think it's 204. So when they say this is a 204 case, so that boom, everybody knows. But when you're dealing with new lawyers or new JPOs or new case managers, things like that may go right over their head, and they may throw those words of HT out. And sadly, that's happened a couple of times. We've had children saying, "I'm not HT." So they may not understand it, but they'll say it. So I think we get our leaders involved. We set up ourselves where we have that connection with law enforcement. I mean, similar to our veterans treatment court, we have a victim. We have people that have suffered from PTSD that are literally advising the judge and meeting with those victims. We would need the same for adult court. Survivor victims, being able to advise the court, case manager to help run. Our option court, like I said, missing child specialist. I don't know that you have a locator, somebody doing location for the adults. Usually that may be difficult because of the population, the numbers, but I would think you'd want that as a consideration also. And there's just quite a few things, but I think it starts at our leaders' level of, yeah, we've identified that this is an issue. We've identified that this is a problem. Education continues to be an initial step, but now we need to protect victims, and this is how it can be accomplished. I'm not aware of any adult victims court in the state of Florida. In New York, several of the boroughs, they have when they have prostitution cases, they immediately that's essentially their adult victims court, that they'll treat those individuals that are charged with prostitution as human trafficking victims and provide services from there. So maybe we look at that as well.
How does that work well with our liaison? Or how can our liaison help identify working? How does our liaison help us work towards that end? I guess.
So I think we need to sit down with the liaison and talk about identifiers, talk about what specific things we need to identify in court, and then what we can identify from court records. And I think that'll help the liaison further step forward. And then, the liaison can obviously travel, go to the New York boroughs and see how they handle their court. There's a handful of courts around the country that deal with adult charges. I think Seattle has one and has for several years. I know the boroughs in New York do. I think at one point I was told 9 out of 11 boroughs in New York have essentially human trafficking victims court. So there's pockets around the country. I know that Texas and Oklahoma want to do that because they've been contacting me about our court, and they want to know what steps they need to take. So I think we need to understand, first of all, who's all engaged. And that was the benefit of us going to Miami, is we understood all the players. We also understand the necessity for collaboration. So, Department of Corrections will need to be engaged as well. So they understand whether recommendations in terms of pre-sentence investigation reports or things of probation, things of that nature, that all these different issues need to be addressed by all of the different individuals that a victim could encounter.
Mhm. Understood, understood. Well, this is very, very valuable information because I know that there's some interest in this among our membership that, among our board in creating an adult human trafficking court. Understanding our process and how to get that going is going to be important, but working with educating not only the judiciary, but also the liaison is is good first step, and then identifying how we go about actually adopting a potential court would obviously be under Judge Figueroa's provision, but it's unfortunate he's not here today. Gina, do you have anything you'd like to offer in the way of guidance or comments based on what you've heard so far?
Hello, thank you for allowing me to speak momentarily. Having received the materials that were provided in preparation for today's meeting, that was really the first opportunity that I had to really peruse the subject matter only conceptually with regard to the development of a potential adult court. So it's pretty premature for me to actually have something substantive to say. And I certainly have not spoken to Chief Judge Figueroa on the issue because he is attending a bar meeting for the 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of the end of this week. So it's quite possible that if you meet again, and even if you hold another meeting between the planned meeting now in August, that might be another subject for us to have more dialogue on the subject. I guess that's what I would offer, unless you have any specific questions.
No, I appreciate the comments back. I know you're sitting in his chair.
Yes.
But I also do know that he's heard Judge Bowman present to us before, and I know there is some interest. Again, we've just had our liaison in place for about a year, so we were making progress. Unfortunately, it seems like baby steps, and that's as far as we go. But the good news is I think we are making some good progress, and we're putting the tools into place as the human trafficking team over at the Crisis Center continues to work on being a resource for those that do call in. And the Tip Lab Bright Scope project, it looks for, where are capacities for being able to provide real, referral sources. I think that's a great benefit. Being aware that we have no housing, protective housing in Hillsborough County is a problem. I do know that Miracles Outreach is a foster group home that does provide specifically assistance for children, but we don't have anything for adults. And I know that I've spoken with the Spring about how they've been able to be successful for domestic violence, but that is not a crossover, a crossover population that can serve both populations. So it would need to be separate. Miss Connie, you're recognized.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Commissioner. Judge Bowman, thank you. It was phenomenal. And more importantly, I love what you talked about options court, but thank you for extending it to our adults because we have been having this conversation about adult court. I'm going to go back to about 2015. So I'm glad we're bringing it back up to conversation. We have done so several times on the commission, but thank you. Also, I'd like to just point out, we do have a court, and it is Tyler Court in Sarasota. They were Sail of Freedom. They were the very first ones that started Tyler Court for adults in the state of Florida, and they started this back in 2014. So their model is very, very successful. And once again, I would like to put it on the table for us to look at their model because to travel there, sit in there once every time they run a court, really get a feel for it. They're in our own backyard. More importantly, they are already a service provider that we go to for adults, along, of course, with Created. And so I'd like to put that on the table for us to really look at and utilize that because, again, they're a service provider. They're in our backyard. We can go multiple times opposed to going around the country. So looking at our dollars and how do we spend those correctly. One of the other things that I'd like to, and it's something that I've learned recently, So when you were talking about our youth and then rolling into adults, but we were really hyper focusing on sex trafficking. I do want to point out that our youth and our adults that are working in strip clubs, that is also labor trafficking. So there is a crossover with sex trafficking and labor trafficking, and we seem to forget that. And again, I just put all the pieces of the puzzle together about that. So again, thank you, and whatever we can do, let the Education and Outreach Committee know. We are here to support in any way that we can, but thank you again, Judge Bowman and Commissioner Overman.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we move on to the next item, which was reviewing the teacher reporting, and unfortunately, I do not believe that school board member Perez is with us, so we may have to bring that back. But what I would also like the Judicial and Legislative and Judicial Affairs Committee to review, in addition to the various different charges in the trafficking sentencing guidelines for those related to trafficking charges, but also to take a look at the teacher reporting requirements. Now that the kids are back in school, teachers are there, we've got a shift of what's happening right now in DCF in terms of case management. Many of the school programs are up and running again. So there's a lot more eyes on, and I'm curious if we can get, we'll send a request from board member Perez to see if she can get us some guidelines on, or if someone on the committee can give us some guidelines on teacher required reporting. Reporting requirements for abuse are there, but I was curious if there are any required reporting for the appearance or human trafficking circumstances. So we'll see if we can get more information on that. And that really just sort of runs into the services and resources category. Jillian, did you want to do that report?
Yeah. So we also met on April 28th as the Services and Resources Subcommittee. One of our big goals in services and resources right now has been trying to recruit more community providers into that committee. So we had quite a few new members at the last meeting, which was great. And one of the things that we also did was bring in case managers from two of our service providers in the county, one that focuses on minors and one on adults. And so we kind of had a discussion around what are a lot of the major gap areas that we currently have throughout Hillsborough County as case managers and providers are seeking to get services for the victims and survivors that they're working with. So that was a really great discussion, a really robust discussion by our committee. We identified quite a few situations, some of which have been discussed throughout this meeting today, with needing some things were like victim relocation services, getting identification, shelter and housing, which was pointed out there's not currently housing for minors in our county. There is housing for adults in our county through Created, and also Sail of Freedom has a home within Hillsborough County. And then one of the major things that was discussed by our subcommittee actually goes back to what we were discussing at the beginning of this meeting when it comes to training, because we found that a lot of resources are going to the same providers, like for mental health care, for health care, different things like that. And we found from the case managers that there's hesitancy in some of the using at some locations because there's not a trauma-informed training that's already happened. So we thought that that's maybe something that this commission could take on, is in addition to the other trainings we've talked about, having a training that's teaching that trauma-informed approach to community providers that are already providing the services to that population. I mean, as we named places that we, frequent for all the levels of care that are needed for a survivor, there's quite a few that that we're all going to regularly. And just one idea that we had is maybe creating a certification that, can be that, somebody could say, we've been trauma-informed trained to work with this population. And that way every provider knows which locations have had that training and can, go to those more frequently. So we had a discussion really around that and how that kind of relates to the training aspects that we've already talked about. And we also talked about wanting to engage the education committee and also the survivor advisory council with, how we can make that happen. So that's really what our meeting was about on April 28th.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Are you familiar with what trauma-informed training programs are out there to be able to identify that with our partners that provide that service?
There are similarly to the training you mentioned before, there are quite a few different options. So I think that would be something where we would want to look at those and then offer a suggestion of one. But there's quite a few. And I'm sure the Crisis Center would have a lot of information on that as well.
Okay. Let's see, who's got their hands up? Kathleen, do you recognize?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Of course, Jillian, we'd be willing to partner in that. And that wouldn't it be wonderful as we move forward with Bright, that is something that we either make an important piece of their being part of the system, that they have trauma-informed training. Yeah, so that would be great. I like that idea.
Excellent, excellent. I'm sure at the statewide conference in November, there might be some sessions on trauma-informed training. At least I would hope so. But that is scheduled for November 21st. And it is, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure whether it's virtual or not.
Yes.
I think it is, in order to make sure that people attend, but I just want to have everyone remember to put that on your calendar. I've attended the actual one that was in person. The last time it was in person over in Orlando, it was excellent. Learned a great deal. So it kind of gives not only us, but we can also make sure that we get out to our various networks of providers and make sure they're aware of the conference so that if there's an opportunity for them to attend, we'll get that information out there. Okay, that was the end of our reports. What I'd like to do is remind everyone to, for especially the services, the education outreach committee, to get us some budget numbers for the next meeting, which is August 18th, but the next set of committee meetings is July 28th. Excuse me. And what we'll do is reach out to, I'll reach out to Judge Bowman and ask him to give me some feedback, because I know he's seen Judge Bowman's presentation before, Figueroa. I'll reach out to Judge Figueroa and know he's seen Judge Bowman's presentation before. Is Public Defender Holt here? Still in the room? I can't see anybody.
Yes, ma'am. Good to see you.
No, you aren't. Well, now it's good to see you. I can't see the room. I'm looking at a whole bunch of black boxes.
It's all the gray hair.
Now I can see you. Would you like to shed some light on your role as it might pertain to the potential of having something like a human trafficking court? What's your take? I know you indicated earlier to me that you had done some traveling to visit various different other cities and what they were doing. Can you share your thoughts?
So I think one of the things that Connie Rose said was a good idea, that we should probably travel and see something that's close by and look at it a couple of times, because I think we have differing representations from different players in the court, in the different court systems, about how things are really working. So I think it's really important for us to maybe take a breath and go see those things. I just reached out to the clerk's office because I'd like to get a better understanding of what these numbers are. I heard what Judge Bauman was saying, but I want to make sure I understand what these numbers represent. I did tell Mr. Klug just now, I shared with him what the Florida statute is that deals with human trafficking cases. It's a really complicated statute, and really there's a lot of things that we're going to have to look at in there. You probably will not have a court where you can mix county court and circuit court, so that's going to have to be probably a differential that occurs. One of the things that obviously is going to matter is the funding and the resources that can actually be obtained for any type of similar court. And the criminal punishment code, we don't have sentencing guidelines here in Florida anymore. What we have is a criminal punishment code that deals really only with felony offenses. And my recall is that when the statute was passed in 2020, there were some enhancements in punishments also. So I think it's important for us to be able to give this commission a really good in-depth view of what the status of the law is, what the sentencing schemes are that exist. And obviously, in misdemeanor court, we're talking about offenses. When we talk about DV, primarily they're misdemeanors. When we talk about prostitution charges, again, that's primarily misdemeanors. Depending on how these are charged, the most enhanced punishment you can have on a county court case is up to 364 days in the county jail. So there's a lot that we probably need to discuss, not only in our committee, but obviously with this commission, so that there's a good understanding of what we could do or not do in terms of what Judge Bowman's looking for. And then lastly, I'm always going to be of the position that we should not use the criminal justice system in order to address what I consider to be quality of life types of charges, and then instead what we should put is in place a good, robust pre-arrest system that provides the services that are necessary for the individuals that are the victims of the subject matter that we're talking about. And that's what's really worked with the Spring. They have done a really great job of finding a way of not placing people into the criminal justice system and instead diverting individuals to safe places where they can reside, to jobs, to educational opportunities, to safe places for their children. So there's a good model with the Spring that I think we could use rather than use the criminal justice system as the intervening factor.
Okay, that's good. Well, then we have our agenda for the July 28th meeting. All right. Okay, wonderful. Is there, with that, we've heard from all of our committees. Do we have any old business that we need to address? I think we pretty much have covered all of those items. Any new business? And I can't see the room, so I can't tell you if there's any hands raised there, but I don't see any on the screen. And so with that, I will thank everyone for attending. I appreciate it. So I will be physically present at the next meeting. My apologies for not being able to be there today. And call the meeting adjourned. Thank you.